On this week's episode of the podcast, I'm going to talk with you about group interviews. What are they, and how can you stand out in one and get the job that you're applying for? I will answer a student-submitted question on work schedules, and I will give this week's job leads. It's the week of December 9th through the 13th, and this is the QC Step Podcast. Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of the QC Step Podcast. I'm Corey Finneran. You can connect with QC Step through your social networking accounts. We are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and you can go to qcstep.com/Facebook, and we are at QC Step on Twitter and Instagram. I use those to send out quick employment tips and job leads, and they're also a way for you to stay in contact with us. If you're filling out a job application and you have a question, you can contact us through Facebook or Twitter, and we will help you with whatever you're having trouble with. Our social networking accounts are also ways for you to send in questions to me for the podcast. I have a student-submitted question this week, and it's from Kwentin. He asks, "How much freedom do I have to make my own work schedule?" And that's a good question, Kwentin. If you're in high school and you're applying for a job, you're going for a position that is entry level, and that means you should be available any time outside of school that an employer needs you. Now, an employer will be understanding if you go to church or something like that, but really, you should have open availability. And if you go into an interview and give them a bunch of times that you're not available, it will hurt your chances of being hired. And if you're already hired and working, and then you give them a bunch of times that you're not available, you will probably lose any clout that you had in getting hours, and you'll probably hurt your chances of getting a promotion. So Kwentin, with some employers, you may have some freedom and flexibility with your schedule. But my advice is to not take advantage of that and really be available any time that the employer needs you. So again, if you have any questions that you would like answered on the podcast, you can send them to me on Facebook. You can tweet them to me, or you can email me, info@qcstep.com. And I really enjoy taking your questions. And if you're nervous at all about sending them in, I only use first names, and I don't even need to use your first name if you don't want me to. If you send in a question, chances are there are other students watching this that probably have that same question. So don't be nervous. I was at United Township High School last week and talking with Mr. Feller students about how they can use social networking to get a job. Feller was talking with a few students about a group interview that they had coming up. Group interviews are kind of rare, but it's something that you should be prepared for. A group interview is when an employer interviews several candidates at once in the same room. In other words, if you're in a group interview, your competition is sitting right next to you. As I said, group interviews aren't real common. You might have a group interview if a business needs to hire a larger number of people. So maybe for a seasonal position, or if a store is opening and they need to staff the entire store. Employers conduct group interviews because they can save a lot of time by interviewing a group of applicants. A group interview will probably have between 5 and 10 applicants in it. So here are 5 tips for standing out in a group interview. Number 1, be prepared. This is a given, really. You should always be prepared before you walk into an interview. Mentally prepare yourself for the questions that you will probably be asked. But anytime you have an interview scheduled, you should prepare yourself for any situation that might present itself. Be prepared for an interview in a loud environment. Be prepared for an interview with somebody that maybe doesn't seem to have much of a personality. Be prepared to interview with someone that's in a hurry and doesn't seem very nice. And be prepared for a group interview. A group interview can be an intimidating process because you're basically surrounded by your competition. If you're shy, this can be a very intimidating process. So mentally prepare yourself for how you might handle these situations. If you have thought about how you might handle a group interview, you will be more prepared. Also, being prepared means being dressed to impress for the interview. And this is important in any interview, but especially a group interview. Because you're sitting right next to your competition, you will want to be the best dressed in the room. This will show that the interview is important to you. Another way that you can be prepared is by having your elevator speech ready. And if you're not familiar with that term, an elevator speech is 3 to 4 sentences that tells an employer who you are and why you're the right person for the job. Sometime in January, I plan to spend an episode on elevator speeches. If you're prepared with an elevator speech and you're prepared to tell an employer why you're the right person for that job, it will put you at an advantage over the person sitting next to you that's not as prepared. Like with any interview, do your research. Know the business and know the responsibilities of the job that you're applying for. If you know more about the business and the position than those around you in a group interview, you'll have an advantage. The second tip for standing out in a group interview is to stay calm. As I said, if you are expecting a one-on-one interview and you walk into a group interview situation, your natural reaction might be to panic. Well, don't do that. Stay calm. Don't let the other applicants affect how you do on the interview. Look at the positives in the situation. Now you'll be able to hear the question and maybe have a little bit longer to think about your answer. But that's not to say that you should just sit back and let other people answer. And that leads us to the third tip for standing out in a group interview: talk. If a question is asked and you want to give your answer and nobody speaks right away, jump in. It shows initiative and it shows confidence. It's too easy, especially if you're shy, to sit back during a group interview. But if you sit back and you don't say anything, why would an employer offer you a job? If you don't talk, you're not getting the job. But that doesn't mean to dominate the conversation either. A group interview is also an opportunity for you to show off your people skills, your social skills, and your teamwork skills. The interviewer will give the group the opportunity for questions. Be prepared with a question and ask it. I talked a few minutes ago about knowing the business and knowing the responsibilities for the job that you're applying for. Ask a question that shows that knowledge. Let's say you're interviewing for a courtesy clerk position. Word the question to show your knowledge, but also ask a question. For example, you could ask this: I know that some of the responsibilities of a courtesy clerk is to help customers bag groceries, bring in carts, and clean up messes. What other responsibilities does this position include? That question shows that you have a great understanding of the position, but you also want to learn more. A question like that will give you an advantage in a group interview situation. The fourth tip for standing out in a group interview is to pay attention. There will be a lot of opportunities to be distracted. The answers of other applicants could distract you. Maybe there's an applicant that's being disruptive. Do your best to ignore all of the distractions and pay attention. Listen to the answers of the other applicants. And also, while they're answering their questions, pay attention to the interviewer. Look to see what they react to. Their facial expressions and their body language will tell you a lot. There will be a lot going on in that room. Pay attention and use it to get that job. While you're not talking, smile and have eye contact with both the interviewer and the person answering the questions. This makes you look engaged. There will be people that are staring down and thinking about their next answers. If you have spent the right amount of time preparing yourself, you won't need to spend as much time thinking about your answers in the interview. Pay attention, smile, and have good eye contact. Those things will help you stand out. The fifth tip for standing out in a group interview is to follow up. You will always want to follow up after an interview, either with a thank you note or an email or a phone call, but this is especially important because if someone interviews a group of people, it's possible that they could forget which applicant is which. Maybe they forget some of your answers. Let's say that you answered a question, or that you asked a question and mentioned the job responsibilities like we did before. In your thank you note, you could write this: "Thank you for interviewing me on Thursday. I appreciate the opportunity to tell you about my volunteer work experiences with my neighborhood and my involvement in my school work programs. I would also like to thank you for answering my question about the job responsibilities of a courtesy clerk. Thank you for your time and the interview, and I look forward to hearing from you." There is a lot of stuff covered in that note. You thanked them multiple times, and you reminded them multiple times who you are, highlighting the things that you brought up in the interview: your volunteer work, your involvement with the school work program, and the question that you asked. As I said in the beginning of this discussion, group interviews can be very intimidating, but if you follow these 5 tips, you will have a better chance of being successful and getting that job. I post job leads to qcstep.com every Monday morning, and if there is an online application, I post the link to it there. Like I said last week, there aren't a ton of job leads this time of year. I looked on McDonald's website, and it indicates that every location on the Illinois side of the Quad Cities, including Aledo, is hiring. I don't know if that's really the case, but it does go to show that fast food businesses are always hiring, and that's something that I say on here all the time. So apply with these fast food businesses. Here over the next 3 or 4 months, that will be where most of the job openings are. And again, I usually don't list the fast food openings on here, but you should always assume that they're hiring and accepting applications. And the best way to apply with fast food restaurants is to go in and pick up the applications. Most of these are not online. PetSmart in Davenport is hiring stocker associates, cashiers, and pet bathers, and there's an online application for PetSmart, and it's under the link Job Leads, or it's under the post Job Leads December 9th, 2013. Steak and Shake in Moline is hiring dishwashers and bussers, and you can apply in person. If you would like help with these or any other applications, ask your step teacher or your co-op teacher to contact Gary or Carrie, or you can email me info@qcstep.com, and I will pass it along to them. Well, that does it for this week's episode. I know that many of you will be taking finals next week, but I'm still going to release an episode of the podcast. So if you don't watch next week's episode in class, you might want to watch it on your own. Next week, I'm going to talk with you about what you can do to gain work experiences over your winter break. If you're not working a job, these are the things that you can use to pad your resume and your applications and maybe make some money while you're not in school. Thank you for watching, listening, and downloading, and I will be back next week with another episode of the QC Step Podcast.